When you think of World War III, where does your mind go? Probably Europe, right? Some historical battlefield. But what if the next global conflict doesn't ignite there at all? What if it sparks across the huge, incredibly important waters of the Pacific? Today, we're going to dive into what that could look like, and trust me, it's a scenario we all need to wrap our heads around.
So what happens if it starts here? It's a really chilling thought, isn't it? Because a war in the Pacific, wow, it would pull in the world's biggest economies, jam up the busiest shipping lanes on the planet, and pit the most advanced militaries against each other. To really get a handle on the risks, and more importantly, figure out how to avoid them, we've actually got to start by looking backward.
Yeah, the Pacific, it has a long, and let's be honest, often really bloody history when it comes to big powers clashing. And if you look closely, you start to see these patterns emerge from the past. And these patterns, they offer some super important and, frankly, pretty unsettling lessons for what's happening right now.
Just take a look at this timeline. For pretty much 100 years, this region has been a nonstop arena for major power struggles. We're talking about Imperial Japan's expansion back in the 30s, the attack on Pearl Harbor. Then you have the brutal proxy wars of the Cold War in places like Korea and Vietnam. And it leads right up to the tensions we're all reading about today. You know, the names change, the tech gets more advanced, but the core story of conflict here, it just keeps repeating itself. And this history, it's not just random events. It actually shows us 4 key patterns that just keep coming up. First up, you've got the classic fight over resources and security. Back in the 40s, it might have been oil. Today, it's all about those super important semiconductor supply chains. Then, number 2, there's the huge danger of miscalculation, where leaders just completely underestimate their opponent's willingness to fight. Third, the geography and the web of alliances in the Pacific mean one little clash can suddenly drag in a whole bunch of other countries. And finally, there's technology. It's always a game changer, right? From aircraft carriers in World War II to the hypersonic missiles we have today. And all of this points to one massive, critical mistake that gets made over and over again. It's this belief that the next war will be quick, a short, decisive victory. But history tells us, nope, that's not what happens. Pacific wars almost always turn into these long, brutal, grinding struggles that have just devastating consequences for absolutely everyone involved. Okay, so with all those lessons from history rattling around in our heads, let's look forward. What would a Pacific war look like today? Who are the big players? And, where could it all kick off? A huge war these days probably isn't going to start with some formal declaration. It's way more likely to just erupt from a crisis that spins completely out of control. Picture a tense standoff over Taiwan, or maybe a collision between 2 naval ships in the South China Sea. But maybe the scariest trigger of all is just simple miscalculation, a fighter jet getting too close to another one, something that escalates so fast that diplomacy has no chance to catch up.
And you can see from this chart here, this would not be a simple two-sided fight. Not at all. I mean, sure, the US and China would be at the center of it, but this whole complicated web of alliances would light up almost immediately. You'd have key US allies like Japan, South Korea, and Australia pulled right in. Russia might see a chance to make a move. All of a sudden, you've got dozens of nations being forced to pick a side. So, if a war like this does break out, it's going to be completely different from anything we've ever seen before. The battlefield isn't just going to be some islands or some patch of ocean. No, it's going to be everywhere, all at the same time. The military has a term for this. They call it multi-domain warfare. And what that really means is it's a fight that's coordinated across every possible front. Not just the physical ones, sea, air, and even space, but also the digital ones. We're talking about cyberspace and the information space. That's literally the battle for what you see, what you hear, and what you believe. Just think about this shift for a second. The old way of war was all about grabbing territory with tanks and ships, right? A new war, its goal is to paralyze the enemy. You do that by hitting their digital infrastructure, cutting off their global supply chains, and using things like AI-powered disinformation to just completely destroy public morale. And this right here, this is where it gets personal for every single one of us. The very first casualties in a Pacific war probably wouldn't even be soldiers on a battlefield. They'd be in our global economy. Think about it. The supply chains for all the semiconductors that power your phone, your computer, your car, poof, they'd be cut almost instantly. Want to know how bad it could get? Look at this one number. About a third, 1/3 of all global trade passes through the South China Sea. just that one area. If you shut that down, it's not a regional problem anymore. It would trigger a global economic depression. The level of disruption it's almost impossible to fully wrap your head around.
And then there's the big one. Hovering over every single decision, every troop movement, every single diplomatic cable is the nuclear shadow. You've got the US, China, and Russia, all nuclear-armed powers. That constant, terrifying risk that things could escalate to the unthinkable would shape the entire conflict, even if a single nuke is never actually used.
Okay, I know this is a super grim picture we're painting. But look, the point of this isn't to just be a doomsayer. The whole point is to understand the risks so that we can actually do something to prevent them. A catastrophe like this is not inevitable. It comes down to choices. So the question is, how do we choose a better path? Well, there is a path forward. It's not easy, but it's clear. Step 1, you have to strengthen crisis communication. I'm talking about real, reliable military-to-military hotlines that actually work to stop incidents before they spiral out of control. Step 2, invest in modern arms control. We need rules of the road for new things like cyber warfare. Step 3 is this tricky balancing act between deterrence, being strong enough that nobody wants to attack you, and reassurance, always leaving the door open for talks. And finally, step 4, countries need to work together to protect the global infrastructure, like undersea cables, that we all depend on. And you know what? In the world we live in today, the tech community has a huge, huge role to play in this. We're talking about designing AI for stability, not just to get a military advantage. It means making sure there is always a human in the loop when it comes to life or death decisions. And it also means building the tools to fight back against the flood of AI-fueled disinformation that could easily pour gasoline on a crisis. When you boil it all down, it really comes back to this one powerful idea. Wars aren't like earthquakes or hurricanes. They're not a force of nature. They happen because of human choices. They happen because of misperceptions and, maybe most importantly, a failure of imagination. History has given us plenty of warnings. But the future? That's still up to us to write. Thank you so much for sticking with us and digging into this. I know it's a difficult topic, but it's just so incredibly important. The road to war is paved with miscalculation and fear, but the path to peace, that's built on understanding. So I guess the biggest question it leaves us with is, do we have the imagination to choose that better path?